What happens when one of the most respected journalists in America sits down with one of the most talked about women in the world? And instead of the carefully orchestrated conversation everyone expected, it turns into a battle of wills that neither of them saw coming. What happens when the questions get too sharp, the answers get too defensive, and a live television interview spirals completely out of control? You're about to find out, because what went down on CNN this morning is already breaking the internet. Before we get into it, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me whose side you're on after you hear what actually happened. Trust me, you're going to have opinions. The studio lights were blazing hot, the kind of heat that makes even the most seasoned television personalities shift uncomfortably in their seats. Anderson Cooper sat across from Meghan Markle in the familiar CNN studio, his blue eyes steady and focused as the cameras rolled live. This was supposed to be a friendly conversation, a chance for Meghan to discuss her latest philanthropic work, her life in California, and maybe touch on some of the ongoing media narratives that seem to follow her everywhere. The interview had been promoted for weeks, and millions of viewers were tuned in, expecting the usual dance of carefully worded questions and even more carefully crafted answers. Anderson started with a warm smile, his voice smooth and professional. "Meghan, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I know you've been selective about the interviews you've done over the past year, so we really appreciate you being here." Meghan smiled back, her posture perfect, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Thank you for having me, Anderson. I've always respected your work, and I think it's important to have these conversations in spaces where nuance is actually valued." "Well, I certainly hope we can provide that," Anderson replied, glancing down at his notes. "I want to start by talking about your recent initiative focused on paid family leave. It's something you've been quite vocal about, and I'm curious what drew you to this particular cause." Meghan's eyes lit up slightly, clearly comfortable with this territory. "It's such a fundamental issue, Anderson. When I became a mother, I realized very quickly how broken the system is. The fact that in one of the wealthiest countries in the world, parents are forced to choose between bonding with their newborn and paying their bills, it's unconscionable. This isn't a political issue, it's a human issue." Anderson nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You've framed it as a human issue, but of course, it has become quite political. You wrote letters to members of Congress. You made phone calls to senators. Some people have questioned whether someone in your position, given your connection to the British royal family, should be involving themselves in American policy debates. How do you respond to that?" There it was, the first shift in tone, subtle but unmistakable. Meghan's smile tightened just a fraction. "I think that's an interesting framing, Anderson. I'm an American citizen. I was born here, I vote here, and I pay taxes here. The idea that I should somehow be disqualified from participating in democracy because of who I married is, frankly, quite problematic." "I don't think anyone is saying you're disqualified," Anderson countered, his voice remaining calm but his gaze sharpening. "The question is more about influence and whether there's an appropriate boundary. You have a platform that most American citizens don't have, and that platform was largely built on your royal connection. Does that come with a responsibility to be more cautious about political engagement?" Meghan uncrossed and recrossed her legs, a small gesture, but one that suggested growing discomfort. "So what you're saying is that because I married into a family I didn't ask to be born into, I should give up my First Amendment rights. That doesn't sound like the America I know." "That's not what I'm saying at all," Anderson replied, his tone still measured. "I'm asking about the nuance of your position. You stepped back from royal duties, citing a desire for privacy and independence, but you've remained very much in the public eye, very much engaged in public discourse. Some people see a contradiction there." "Some people will see contradiction in anything I do, Anderson," Meghan said, and now there was an edge in her voice that hadn't been there before. "If I'm quiet, I'm complicit. If I speak up, I'm attention-seeking. If I stay in England, I'm trapped. If I leave, I'm difficult. There's literally no version of me that certain people will accept, and I think we both know why that is." Anderson leaned forward slightly. "Why is that, in your view?" "I think you know the answer to that question," Meghan said, her eyes meeting his directly. "I think we all know the answer to that question." "I'd like to hear you say it," Anderson pressed. Meghan paused, and the silence stretched for just a moment too long. The kind of silence that makes live television feel electric. "Because I don't fit into the neat little box that people want to put me in. Because I ask questions, because I'm a woman who married into an institution and refused to just smile and wave when I saw things that were wrong. But you did know what you were marrying into, didn't you? Anderson asked, and his voice was gentler now, but the question was sharp. The royal family isn't exactly a secret organization. The protocols, the press attention, the scrutiny, none of that was hidden from you. Meghan's jaw tightened. Knowing something intellectually and living it are two completely different things, Anderson. You can read about what it's like to have every single thing you do dissected and criticized. But until you're living it, until you're watching lies about you printed as fact, until you're being compared to your sister-in-law in every single headline in ways that are clearly designed to pit two women against each other, you cannot understand what that does to a person. I think that's fair, Anderson acknowledged. But I also think it's fair to ask about accountability. You and your husband have given interviews, produced documentaries, written books, all of which have made very serious allegations about your time in the royal family. You've talked about racism, about neglect, about being silenced. But when those claims are questioned, or when people ask for specifics, the response is often that you want privacy. How do you reconcile making public allegations with wanting privacy? We've been specific, Meghan shot back. We've been very specific about our experiences. Have you, though? Anderson asked, and now his journalist instincts were fully engaged. You've spoken about a conversation regarding your son's skin color, but you haven't said who had that conversation. You've talked about not receiving help when you were struggling with your mental health, but the palace has said that resources were offered. You've described a system that you say was working against you, but from the outside it looked like you had the wedding of the century, the support of the Queen, and a global platform. Help people understand the disconnect. Meghan was no longer smiling. The disconnect, Anderson, is that what you see and what you live are not the same thing. The fact that I had a big wedding doesn't mean I wasn't isolated. The fact that I smiled in photos doesn't mean I wasn't suffering. And the fact that you're sitting here asking me to prove my pain is exactly the problem. I'm not asking you to prove your pain, Anderson said carefully. I'm asking you to help people understand the specific mechanisms of what you say happened. Because when you make claims about an institution as significant as the British monarchy, people are going to have questions. And I've answered them, Meghan insisted. Multiple times, in multiple forums. At some point, Anderson, you have to ask yourself why my answers are never enough. Why there's always another question, always another demand for proof. Always another reason why what I experienced couldn't possibly be true. Because your story has evolved, Anderson said. And this was the moment when the temperature in the room truly shifted. Details have changed between interviews. Timelines haven't always lined up. And when people point that out, they're accused of being part of the problem. But isn't scrutiny part of public discourse? Isn't that what journalism is? Meghan's eyes flashed. Scrutiny is one thing, Anderson. A coordinated campaign to discredit someone's lived experience is something else entirely. And I think you're smart enough to know the difference. I'm trying to have a conversation, Anderson said, his voice remaining steady. That's all this is it? Meghan challenged. Because it feels a lot like an interrogation. The tension was palpable now. And even though this was live television, neither of them seemed willing to back down. If asking follow-up questions feels like an interrogation, maybe that says something about the answers, Anderson replied, and there was a stillness in his delivery that made the words land even harder. Meghan stared at him for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was cold. You know what, Anderson? I came here thinking we were going to have an actual conversation. I thought you were different from the tabloids, from the people who twist everything I say. But you're doing the exact same thing, just with better lighting and a nicer suit. I'm asking you questions that a lot of people want answered, Anderson said. That's my job. Your job, Meghan said, and she was leaning forward now, her composure cracking, is supposed to be telling the truth. Not playing devil's advocate for people who have been trying to tear me down since the day I got engaged. I'm not playing devil's advocate, Anderson insisted. I'm presenting the other perspective. That's what balanced journalism looks like. Balanced journalism, Meghan repeated, and there was something almost bitter in the way she said it. Is that what we're calling it now? Because from where I'm sitting, Anderson, it looks a lot like you've already decided what the truth is, and you're just trying to get me to confirm your narrative. Anderson's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, frustration maybe, or determination. My narrative is that I don't know what the full truth is, which is why I'm asking questions. You've built a public profile on speaking your truth, but truth implies facts, and facts can be verified. When you say the institution failed you, when you say there was racism, when you say you were left without support, these are serious allegations. They deserve serious examination. They deserve to be believed, Meghan shot back. When women come forward, when women of color come forward, the first response shouldn't be skepticism. It shouldn't be. Prove it. Show your receipts. Convince me you're not lying. That's the same pattern that silences people for generations. But you're not being silenced, Anderson countered, and his voice had a slight edge now too. You have the biggest platforms in the world. You've had primetime specials, podcast deals, production companies, best-selling books. If anyone has a voice right now, it's you. Meghan laughed, but there was no humor in it. Having a microphone and being heard are two different things, Anderson. Yes, I can speak, but every time I do, I'm ripped apart. Every word is analyzed for hidden meanings. Every facial expression is turned into a meme. Every time I try to tell my story, people like you ask why I'm still talking about it. So, which is it? Should I speak or should I be quiet? Because I can't seem to win either way. I think people just want consistency, Anderson said. They want the story to make sense. And when it doesn't, when there are contradictions or omissions, they have questions. That's not unfair. What contradictions? Meghan demanded. Name one actual contradiction. Anderson didn't hesitate. You've said you knew nothing about the royal family before you met your husband, that you didn't grow up following them. But there are interviews from years before where you talked about Princess Diana, where you discussed the royal wedding. You've said you were married in private 3 days before the public ceremony. But the Archbishop of Canterbury later clarified that wasn't legally the case. You've talked about your son not receiving a title because of his race. But royal protocol experts have pointed out that great-grandchildren don't automatically receive titles regardless of race. These aren't attacks, Meghan. They're just facts that don't align with what you've said. Meghan's face had gone very still, and when she spoke, her voice was measured but trembling slightly with anger. The fact that you would sit here and use protocol and technicalities to dismiss what I lived through is exactly the problem. Yes, I knew who Princess Diana was. Everyone knew who she was. That doesn't mean I understood what it would be like to live that life. The ceremony the Archbishop is talking about is different from the private exchange of vows we had. But of course, that nuance gets stripped away so people can call me a liar. And as for my son's title, the issue wasn't about automatic entitlement. It was about the conversations around changing the protocol specifically to ensure he wouldn't have security. Specifically because of concerns about how dark his skin might be. But you knew that, Anderson. You knew all of that, and you still chose to frame it the way you did. I framed it the way it's been reported, Anderson said. And those reports have come from multiple sources, including people who were there, people who worked in the palace. Are they all lying? Some of them are, yes, Meghan said flatly. Some of them have agendas. Some of them have been fed information by people who want to control the narrative. You're a journalist, Anderson. You understand how palace sources work. You understand that when someone leaks something to the press, it's rarely because they're concerned about truth. It's because they're concerned about perception. So everyone who contradicts your version of events is part of a conspiracy, Anderson asked, and there was a hint of incredulity in his tone now. That's a lot of people to coordinate. It's not a conspiracy when it's literally their job, Meghan replied. The royal family has an entire communications team whose purpose is to manage their image. When one story looks bad, they plant another story to distract from it. When one member of the family is getting negative press, they make sure someone else gets positive press. This isn't speculation, Anderson. This is documented. This is how they operate. And when I wasn't willing to be the person they threw under the bus to make someone else look good, I became the target. Can you give me a specific example? Anderson pressed. A specific time when you know for a fact that a story was planted about you to benefit someone else. Meghan hesitated, and in that hesitation, Anderson saw an opening. Because that's the issue, isn't it? You talk in broad strokes about systems and institutions, but when it comes to specifics, to names and dates and verifiable incidents, it gets vague, and I understand why you might want to protect certain people. But you can't make sweeping accusations without being willing to back them up. I don't want to protect them, Meghan said, and her voice was rising now. I'm trying to protect myself. Because every time I give a specific, it gets weaponized. Every time I name someone, I'm accused of attacking them. There's a reason people don't come forward about powerful institutions. Anderson, and you're demonstrating that reason right now? I'm asking questions, Anderson repeated. That's all. You're putting me on trial, Meghan corrected. There's a difference. If this were any other interview about any other subject, you wouldn't be interrogating me like this. But because it's me, because it's the royal family, because there are people who desperately want to believe that I'm the problem and not the institution. You're holding me to a standard that you wouldn't hold anyone else to. That's not true, Anderson said, and for the first time, there was a hint of defensiveness in his voice. I've interviewed presidents, world leaders, people accused of serious crimes, and I've asked all of them hard questions. This isn't personal, Meghan. It feels personal, Meghan said quietly, and suddenly her voice was different. Softer, but somehow more dangerous. It feels very personal, Anderson, and I have to wonder why. What is it about me, about my story, that makes you so determined to poke holes in it? What is it that makes you more comfortable believing an institution with a documented history of protecting abusers and covering up scandals than believing a woman who says she was mistreated? Anderson leaned back slightly, and there was a long pause before he responded. I want to believe you, Meghan. I think a lot of people want to believe you. But belief requires trust, and trust requires consistency. When your story changes, when details shift, when you say one thing in one interview and something different in another, it makes it harder to know what the truth is. My story hasn't changed, Meghan insisted. The way I've talked about it has evolved as I've processed it, as I've felt safer talking about it, but the fundamental truth of what I experienced has never changed. I was othered, I was isolated, I was used, and when I stopped being useful, I was discarded. That's the story. Everything else is just details. Details matter, Anderson said. In journalism, in law, in history, details matter. They're the difference between a narrative and the truth. And who decides what the truth is? Meghan challenged. You, the British press. A bunch of Palisades who were never in the room for most of these conversations. I lived at Anderson. I was there. And the fact that my truth, my lived experience, matters less to you than the word of people who have every reason to lie. That tells me everything I need to know about where your priorities are. My priority is getting to the truth, Anderson said, and his voice was firm now. Not your truth, not their truth, the truth, and sometimes that means asking uncomfortable questions. Uncomfortable for who? Meghan asked. Because I'll tell you what's uncomfortable, Anderson. What's uncomfortable is sitting here, on live television, having to defend my sanity, my honesty, my basic credibility, to a man who has never lived a day in my shoes, but feels completely confident judging every choice I've made. What's uncomfortable is knowing that no matter what I say, there will be people who twist it, who use it against me, who add it to their list of reasons why I'm the villain in this story. What's uncomfortable is realizing that I came here hoping for understanding and I'm getting the same treatment I get everywhere else. Anderson looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted slightly. I'm not trying to make you the villain, Meghan. I'm trying to understand what happened. And I think if you're honest with yourself, you know that some of the criticism you've received isn't just about you being a woman or being a person of color. Some of it is about choices you've made, things you've said, ways you've handled situations. You're not just a victim in this story. You're also an actor. You've made decisions that have had consequences, and it's fair to examine those decisions. Of course I've made decisions, Meghan said. And now she was standing up. Her microphone still clipped to her jacket, but her body language screaming that she was done. I made the decision to marry someone I loved. I made the decision to try to make it work in an environment that was hostile to me from day one. I made the decision to protect my mental health and my family when it became clear that staying would destroy me. And I made the decision to speak up when I realized that my silence was being used as a weapon against me. Those were my decisions, Anderson. And I don't regret a single one of them, no matter how many people like you want me to. Anderson remained seated, his hands folded on the desk in front of him, his expression unreadable. Meghan, I think we should finish this conversation. We still have time, and I think there are important things to discuss. Important to who? Meghan asked, her hand moving to unclip the microphone from her jacket. Important to you, important to your ratings, because it's clearly not important to actually hear what I'm saying. You've already made up your mind, just like everyone else. That's not fair, Anderson said, and now he was standing too, his professional composure intact, but his voice carrying more emotion than before. I've given you a platform to tell your story. I've listened to everything you've said, but listening doesn't mean I can't ask questions. It doesn't mean I have to accept everything at face value. You haven't given me anything, Anderson, Meghan replied, pulling the microphone pack from her waistband and setting it on the chair. You invited me here under the pretense of a conversation, and then you ambushed me. You had your list of talking points, your little gotcha moments, all prepared. This was never about understanding. This was about catching me in something, proving some point you'd already decided was true. A producer's voice could be heard off camera, urgent and concerned, but Anderson waved them off. Meghan, please sit down. We can approach this differently. If you feel I've been unfair, let's talk about that. Let's talk about how you want to have this conversation. I don't want to have this conversation anymore, Meghan said, and she was gathering her things now, her purse, her phone, because this is exactly what always happens. I come in good faith. I try to be open. I try to explain, and it's never enough. The questions never stop. The doubt never stops. And I'm tired, Anderson. I'm tired of defending myself to people who don't actually want to understand. I do want to understand, Anderson insisted, moving around the desk now, but understanding goes both ways. You're asking people to believe serious allegations about one of the most famous families in the world. You're asking them to accept that an entire institution was against you. That's a big ask, Meghan. And when people have questions about it, that's not persecution. That's natural skepticism. Natural skepticism, Meghan repeated, shaking her head. You know what, Anderson? If I were a white woman telling this exact same story, we both know this interview would have gone very differently. If I were a blonde princess complaining about the same treatment, you'd be asking how the institution failed me, not whether I was lying about being failed. But because I'm me, because of who I am and where I come from, the default assumption is that I must be the problem. I must be difficult. I must be lying. And I'm done participating in that narrative. Anderson's jaw tightened. That's a serious accusation to make, and it's not true. I've asked tough questions of everyone who sits in that chair, regardless of who they are. This has nothing to do with your race or your background, doesn't it? Meghan challenged, turning to face him directly. Because from where I'm standing, it has everything to do with it. Every question you've asked has been designed to undermine my credibility. Every point you've made has been about why I should be doubted. You didn't ask me what it felt like to be isolated. You asked me to prove I was isolated. You didn't ask me what racism looks like in an institution like that. You asked me to provide documentation of racism. That's not journalism, Anderson. That's disbelief dressed up in professional language. I asked for specifics because that's what responsible journalism requires, Anderson replied, his voice rising slightly. If I just accepted everything you said without question, I wouldn't be doing my job. I'd be doing public relations. And if you approached me with even a fraction of the empathy you've shown to other guests, you'd be doing journalism. But you've decided I'm not worthy of that. You've decided that my story needs to be interrogated and dissected and picked apart until there's nothing left. Well, congratulations, Anderson. You've succeeded. You've made it clear that this space isn't safe for me, just like every other space I've tried to occupy. The studio had gone completely silent, except for their voices. The crew was frozen, cameras still rolling, capturing every moment of the unraveling interview. Anderson took a breath, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. Meghan, I understand you're upset, but walking out doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help your cause. It doesn't help people understand your perspective. Stay, let's reset. Let's have the conversation you wanted to have. I don't think you're capable of having that conversation, Meghan said quietly, and there was something final in her tone. I don't think you came here prepared to hear me. I think you came here prepared to challenge me, to test me, to see if you could break the story down. And maybe that's what you think good journalism is. But what it actually is, Anderson, is exactly the kind of treatment that made me leave that family in the first place. So thank you for the reminder of why I made the right choice. She turned toward the studio exit, her heels clicking on the floor, each step deliberate and measured. Anderson called after her, his professional facade cracking just slightly. Meghan, we're live. People are watching. You're just going to walk out? She paused at the edge of the set, turning back one last time. Yes, Anderson, I am. Because I've learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to participate in your own diminishment. You wanted a story? Well, now you have one. I'm sure it'll get great ratings. And with that, she walked off the set, leaving Anderson Cooper standing alone in the bright studio lights. The cameras still rolling, the silence deafening. He stood there for a moment, clearly processing what had just happened, before turning back to face the camera directly. His expression was complicated, a mixture of frustration, surprise, and something that might have been regret. Well, he said finally, his voice steady but quieter than before. That's not how we expected this morning to go. We'll take a break and be back with more news in a moment. The feed cut to commercial, but the damage was done. The interview that was supposed to be a straightforward conversation had turned into a confrontation that neither party had won. And as the clip began circulating online within minutes, the world was left to decide for themselves who had been right, who had been wrong, and what the truth really was. So there you have it. An interview that started as a simple conversation and ended with one of the most dramatic walkouts in live television history. Now I want to hear from you. Was Anderson Cooper just doing his job as a journalist, asking the tough questions that needed to be asked? Or did he cross a line, treating Meghan unfairly and refusing to believe her story? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure you subscribe because, trust me, this story is going to have people talking for a long time. What do you think? Was Meghan right to walk out?